Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Sean McDowell. He has devoted his career to help bring truth to the next generation. As a college professor, high school teacher, and prolific author, he has exceptional insight into the prevailing culture and imparts his observations to fellow educators, pastors, parents, and students alike. He is currently an associate professor of Christian apologetics at Biola University, the largest and top-ranked graduate program of its kind in the world. As a part-time high school teacher, he has been awarded the Educator of the Year for his hometown, San Juan Capistrano. He's highly motivated, he's highly sought-after speaker. He has spoken at various camps, churches, universities worldwide, and is a frequent guest on radio and television shows. He is a best-selling author and has written or co-written over 20 books. He has a master's degree in both theology and philosophy. In 2014, he earned his PhD in apologetics and worldview studies. Most notably, however, he's a dedicated husband and father, married to his high school sweetheart, Stephanie, since 2000. It's about 19 years now, or 20, you're going on 20 probably. He lives in Southern California, has 3 children. Please welcome Sean McDowell.
Oh, yeah. Well, good evening. This is such a treat to have a chance to be here with you. I've been thrilled and blessed to hear about the vision of STEER and just how all of you are sacrificing to make a difference for missions. I look at this list of who's being supported, and this is kind of the who's who of mission organizations that I benefited from. I won't read all of them, don't worry. Cru, FCA, Awana, Young Life. But I don't see Josh McDowell Ministries on. I'm just kidding. I couldn't resist. A few of you have asked how my father, Josh McDowell, is doing. He spoke here about a dozen years ago. So his body's not getting any younger. But his spirit is just as alive and motivated for the kingdom as ever. It's pretty cool to watch. And I look at my dad and just pray that God can help me be that motivated. I know many of you are with the resources and time you have to build up the kingdom. That's why we're here, and that's what this is all about. On the other side of my family, my wife's family, her dad is one of 12 kids. So family reunions are, whoa, is that me? We'll double check there. I think I'm good if I just only move my lips. My wife's family reunions are like the size of this group right here. Every time we get together, it's like, oh, a new cousin that I met, a new aunt, there's new kids. They're huge. And a few summers ago, we all got together. There's, 50, 60, 70 of us, and we stayed in an area right outside of Sacramento. And there's this place called the South Fork River. And our family decided to go for one day whitewater rafting. Now, this is a pretty famous whitewater rafting place in this part of Northern California. And what happens is you go all morning and then you go all afternoon after you have lunch. It's a full day. And when you show up, because our group is so big, I don't remember, we must have had 5 or 6 rafts just for our family, those who went. And of course, when you get there, they give you instructions in case you get thrown out of the boat, right? You don't try to put your feet down. That's not going to end well. Is this my subtle hint to use this? You're a professional, aren't you? You've done this before. Should I turn this off or just keep talking? I'll assume that means keep talking. I guess that's my job. All right. So they tell you, if you get tossed out of the boat, don't try to put your feet down. That's dangerous. You could get caught. Don't swim to the side. Basically, put your feet forward, lean back, and just kind of ride it through. Well, we went all morning about, 2 or 3 hours. Then you stop for lunch. In the morning, we had kind of 1 and 2 rapids. And then in the afternoon is where we hit just kind of a few 3s, which is the biggest rapids they would take non-specialists like myself and our family, lay people, so to speak. Well, all morning went pretty easy, so I'm thinking, I got this. How hard can it be? So when you're on a raft, the guide is in the back, and they put the two people that they think are supposed to be a little stronger in the front. So my father-in-law was in the front right, they put me in the front left, and we start taking off. I'm like, this is gonna be fun. Let's up it a little bit. And then I see these rapids down a ways, and the guy goes, okay, just so you know, we're about to enter this rapid, and it's called the hospital bar. They named this rapid. And then afterwards, there's an area called the recovery room. It's actually what they call it. So all I remember is we go down kind of the left, and there's a big rock in front of us, shoots us to the right. We hit this thing so hard, my father-in-law goes flying in the back, and he's bigger than I am, goes flying in the back of the boat. I get tossed off the side. Now, when you get tossed, you're upside down, you're flipping around, you're trying to get air, and I come up, and somehow I'm hitting the bottom of the boat. Now, it probably didn't last that long, but it felt like forever, right? Finally, I remember what they said, put my feet up, went through, and then the very end, the first thing I was thinking in my mind was, I need to get back in the boat, right? You get tossed out of a boat like that, you're thinking you want to get back in the boat, especially now that I was in the, quote, recovery room. Well, not only when somebody gets tossed out of a boat, but think about life for a second. When somebody gets physically in an accident or there's an emergency, what happens? Nobody's thinking, you know what? Let's play bingo. Nobody's thinking, you know what? Let's go hunting first. Now, if your life is in jeopardy, you instantly go where? The hospital. If somebody's life is on the line, think about it, and don't think about it, just take them to the hospital. What's interesting, what about when somebody's life gets turned upside down relationally or morally or spiritually? Where do people instantly, without thinking, go? Now, I'd like to say they go to the church just as much as they go to the hospital. But a few years ago, David Kinnaman, a researcher, wrote a book called Unchristian. And they researched outsiders, non-believers, how they view Christians in the church. And in this data, here's what they concluded. They had 6 conclusions they came to. Number 1, hypocritical. Christians say one thing and do another. Number 2, too focused on getting converts at the expense of building relationships with people. Number 3, anti-homosexual. In other words, in their study, they said, if you say, hi, I am a Christian, you might as well say, and I hate gays. In the minds of many people. 4, too sheltered. 5, too political. And 6, judgmental. Can you imagine if people viewed hospitals that way? Can you imagine somebody gets in a car crash and they're thinking, well, hospitals, they're just going to judge me. They're too political. They don't like a certain group of people. Nobody would go. Well, what's more important, somebody's body or their eternal soul? In this study, David Kinnaman says, quote, only a small percentage of outsiders strongly believe that the labels love, respect, hope, and trust describe Christianity. A minority of outsiders perceive Christianity as genuine and real, as something that makes sense and is relevant to their life. Friends, this is heartbreaking. This is heartbreaking. I was speaking with a youth pastor who'd been in youth ministry about 2 decades. And I said, you've been in ministry 2 decades. How has youth ministry and culture shifted in these 2 decades? He said, kind of when I started, it used to be if you have music and food and games, they will come. He goes, now, 1, kids are just so busy. He goes, but 2nd, something I hear somewhat frequently from parents is, why do you want to go to a church? They're bigoted. They're too sheltered. And the same kind of criticism. The same kind of criticism. My question is, what's it going to take for people when their life crashes around them that they don't even think about it? The next thought in their mind is, I got to go to church because that's where I'm going to be loved and experience grace. That's the question. Because I'm a professor at Biola University, I go to these conferences with professors, and people read papers on very obscure Greek words in Mark chapter 14. I find it fascinating. And I went to a session one time, and there was a professor from Dallas Theological Seminary by the name of Darrell Bach. And he was talking about kind of in culture how in Christians, in the minds of so many people now are considered bigoted and intolerant and exclusive. He says, how do we change this? He said, it's not a new program. It's not from the top down. It's when each Christian starts to reach out in genuine, loving relationships with people. That when somebody hears that and their next thought is, you know what? Gosh, the Christians in my life aren't that way. This doesn't ring true. You know, I think he's right, because that's exactly what Jesus did. It's exactly what Jesus did. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Mark chapter 2. If you can't find it, it's right after Mark chapter 1. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Mark. Mark chapter 2, a passage you're familiar with. We're going to kind of break it down and look at it and see how the example of Jesus, what we can learn from it for ministry today. So it's Mark chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. We'll start, I'll just read it for us, and then we'll discuss it. So Mark chapter 2, verse 15. It says, and as he, Jesus, reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes and the Pharisees, when they saw he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Now, when I read this, right away, I'm asking myself a question. Why did sinners want to hang out with Jesus? I mean, think about your life. At some point in your life where you just knew you were sinning. I can think of particular lives, and particular moments, the last thing I was thinking is, I just need to find the holiest person I know to be around. That's not human nature. In fact, what happens? When we sin, we tend to turn away from holiness because it convicts us. But all these sinners are hanging out with Jesus. There's something about his character where he never compromised truth. But even sinners were drawn to his love and his wisdom and his character. What was it about Jesus that sinners wanted to be with him? That's a great question. Now, it says in this passage that they were reclining at the table. Now, I think we can read through this quickly in our culture today, and we miss this because we are busy. We have drive-through. We can now call Uber, and they will deliver whatever food we want. We don't even have to go in public to eat if we don't want to. In this Semitic culture at that time, dining was one of the most powerful ways to connect with people. They would stop and they would share a meal where you shared stories, you shared history, you got to know somebody. In fact, to dine with somebody was basically to consider somebody a friend. You considered somebody an equal. You were saying, by dining with somebody, I accept you. This is a part of what made the betrayal of Judas so bad. And you notice the irony that at a meal when they're breaking bread, Jesus reveals to him that he will be the one who will betray him. We miss this in our culture. In that culture, they were basically saying, this is the worst of the worst because he's a friend and he considers him an equal. And can you at least see, before we go any further, why the Pharisees are skeptical of what Jesus is doing? Now, we like to beat up on the Pharisees for one obvious reason, because Jesus does. But if we were there, I mean, honestly, don't you think if we saw Jesus dining with these people, we wouldn't at least give pause and wonder why he's calling tax collectors and sinners equal and friends? I think we probably would. So we can at least understand where they're coming from. Now let's keep going. He says, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. Now, Levi, where this story takes place, is in Capernaum, which is kind of on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. This is where Jesus kind of considered home base for a season and did much of his ministry before he went into Jerusalem for much of it. It's a small town, probably only a few thousand people live there. Now, tax collectors, you know this, were essentially kind of the worst of the worst to the Jews. Why? Because they were considered betrayers of their own people. So they would turn and work for Rome, who was oppressing the Jews and keeping them from experiencing all of God's blessing. So they were betrayers just by working for Rome, and then many of them would siphon, because of the power that they had, siphon some more money from their own people to keep for themselves. I mean, they're kind of the worst of the worst. And Jesus is dining with them. He's dining with the tax collector. Now, what's interesting, not only are they despised by the community, so he's got tax collectors there, but he also has sinners. Now, when I was a kid and I'd hear the story, I always thought, oh, it's the murderers and it's the prostitutes, the big sins. I don't think that's what it means. Basically, the sinners are those who fail to keep the law in its entirety. So it's not quite as extreme as we might think. But they're not keeping the law, and they know they're not keeping the law. So here's Jesus dining with the wrong people. But then it says, the scribes who were the Pharisees. Now you know this, but who were the Pharisees? Compare the Pharisees with the Sadducees. Now, the Pharisees based their relationship with God on keeping all the laws to a T. Or at least they said they did. They followed all the laws. Now, what did the Sadducees do? The Sadducees based their relationship on God with work in the temple. So when the temple's destroyed in AD 70, who disappears? The Sadducees do. They're no longer with us. You don't hear about stories of the Sadducees, but the Pharisees, even with the temple destroyed, could still follow the law. And then about a century or two after the time of Christ, you see all these rules start to show up about laws about how you could follow and know God, the Mishnah, the Talmud, etc. So the Pharisees are these very strict group of people who pride themselves in following the law. And then Jesus writes this. Jesus said, it is not those who are well who need a doctor, but those who are sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners. So is Jesus putting people into two categories? And we like to do this, don't we? We like to say there's two kinds of people in the world. My favorite one, my basketball coach used to say, there's two kinds of people in the world, those who return their shopping carts and those who don't. I cannot go shopping without feeling convicted. And whether it's the right spirit or not, I always return my shopping cart because I don't want to be that guy. Isn't that brilliant? You will never be able to shop again without feeling guilty for being that guy or that girl. You'll remember that. So is Jesus saying there's two kinds of people in the world? There's the righteous and there's the sinners. That's it. You want to sum it up? There's righteous and there's sinners. I didn't come for those who are righteous. I came for those who are sinners. Is that what Jesus is saying? The answer is no. That's actually harder to do than you think. I had to work on that. Seriously, go like this and say yes. It's harder, right? Because you train yourself. Is Jesus saying there's righteous and there's sinners? The answer is no. How do we know this? Because Scripture makes it clear. Romans 3 and Romans 6, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Do you know what all means in Greek? It means all. Yeah, there's nothing fancy to it. It means all. In fact, in 1 John, the beloved disciple says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. That's pretty strong, isn't it? If you say you have no sin, you deceive yourself. So if Jesus isn't saying there's righteous and there's sinners, what is he doing? He's using the term righteous ironically, not to describe those who are actually righteous, but those who are self-righteous and think their salvation comes from their own merit and faithfulness and works-based salvation. Jesus isn't saying there's righteous and there's sinners. He's saying there's self-righteous who are sinners and there's sinners who aren't self-righteous. In other words, we're all sinners, but some people realize that they're sinners. I came to talk to those who realize it and know it because they're the ones who are open to it. I didn't come to you, Pharisees, because you're self-righteous and you don't even think you need the medicine that I have to offer. So you know what's interesting? People don't go to a hospital because they're sick. That's not why people go to a hospital. People go to a hospital because they're sick and they know it. And they're willing to go for a help greater than themselves to get the healing that they need. You catch that? That's who goes to a doctor. Not everybody who's sick goes to a doctor. It's those who are sick and they know it. And they're willing to humble themselves and recognize they need a knowledge and a power outside of themselves to be fixed and made whole. That's how Jesus is viewing the world in this passage. He's saying there's not actually righteous people. But I didn't come for you, Pharisees, because you think you're good. You think you're better. You don't recognize you're sick, so I don't have any medicine to offer you. I came to bring medicine to people who recognize it and know it. See, by the way, notice here's the point here that's so powerful. Jesus didn't first come and tell the sinners to get their life right, and then he'd be in a relationship with them. He came and dined with them and built a relationship with them, knowing that they couldn't change and become the kind of people that he wanted them to be until they got his medicine of grace. Jesus was not a moralist. Jesus didn't go around telling everybody how to live their lives. He didn't. What he did is he dined with people and he loved people. And he cared for people, knowing that's when they saw the grace and experienced the medicine he had to offer. Then their lives could be changed from the inside out, and they could begin to live the way that God wanted them to live. We get that backwards, don't we? I think sometimes we get that backwards and we miss it. But on the flip side, Jesus didn't go dine with these sinners and say, you know what? To each his own. I'm not going to judge. Just be true to thyself. If it feels good, do it. You're okay in my book. You see, Jesus didn't try to fix behavior first. He loved people and knew they needed his grace. But on the flip side, he also didn't just dine and accept people. He called people to repentance and truth because he knew transformation only came when they had the medicine that he had to offer. Friends, Jesus was not a moralist. You know what turns skeptics and atheists and non-believers away, amongst other things, is when Christians are walking around telling everybody how to live their lives, rather than first modeling it and loving people and looking for an opportunity to speak the truth that sets people free. I'm a huge Marvel fan. I've got 3 kids, high school, elementary school, and junior high. And they've been, for the last decade, watching Captain America and the Avengers. And right now, Marvel's at a very interesting point where I think you're going to start to see this big diversity push start to hit and the movies change over the next few years. I think you're going to see this happen. Now, this has happened in the comics for a long time, but the movies have not caught up with it. So maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it came out that there's this X-Men superhero character called Iceman. There's a big story that Iceman was gay. So they added this into the storyline of the character Iceman. And a Christian evangelist spoke out and he said, here goes Marvel again, corrupting the minds, ruining stories, shame on them. And I heard that and I thought, you know what? There's obviously some truth to that. But I wonder if the media came to me and said, Sean, you're a professor. You work with students. You like Marvel. What do you think about this character becoming gay? What would I say? As I thought about it, I thought my answer would be, I'm not surprised. Culture's been shifting radically on this issue. And Marvel probably realizes if they don't make these changes, they're going to have a backlash from the other side on business. It's probably a business decision they're making. Well, aren't you a Christian? Don't you think that's wrong? I'd say, I am a follower of Jesus. And that implies a certain ethic about how I live. But the reality is, kids who are gay are more likely to be depressed, lonely, and attempt suicide than the rest of the population. Maybe we could reach across partisan lines, find some common ground for the sake of loving these kids. That's what I would say. The question is, how do we get out of our comfort zones and build relationships with people who see the world differently? Because, friends, the world has changed, and it's changing fast, right before our eyes. Right before our eyes, because this little rectangle thing we call a smartphone, this generation of young people has more pressures intellectually and spiritually and emotionally than any generation before. And I don't care if you say, well, I'm in North Dakota, it's a little different than California. First, I'd say it is a little different than California. I will give you that. But it is coming, friends. Because of the smartphone, we have a global culture. I don't care where you live. The ethic of how people think about right and wrong and morality, what it means to be human, the character of God and the church is changing before our eyes rapidly. The question is, how are we going to respond? How are we going to love this new generation where we're seeing depression and loneliness at alarming levels for this new generation called Gen Z? How are we going to love them and minister to them and show them the love of Jesus? Friends, that's the question. That's the question. That's the heart of the question when we look at this generation. So some of you might recognize the name Kirsten Powers. She was a columnist for USA Today for a while, worked at Fox, recently shifted over to CNN. And she wrote a book in 2015 called The Silencing. And it was interesting to me because she has a very fascinating story. She tells in this book her story of how she grew up in kind of the New York area, and basically her and her progressive secular friends had one thing in common they did all the time. They got together and they just kind of mocked Christians for being stupid and uninformed. And she said one of the reasons was, I didn't know a single Christian. She said, I didn't even know one. But then, and you know how the story goes, she met a boy, right? And this guy was a Christian, and it turns out he invited her to go to a church, which happened to be Timothy Keller's church in Manhattan. And he was going through his book, The Reason for God. Now, what he said to her, which I thought was brilliant, he said, are you open-minded and tolerant and inclusive enough to consider going to church with me? That's smart, right? If you're progressive, you pride yourself in being inclusive and open-minded and being tolerant. And he's like, well, I guess I kind of have to go to church. So she goes to church and she hears evidence for the resurrection. She hears evidence for the existence of God, evidence the Bible's true, and this story of Jesus captivated her. And she became a believer. She became a Christian. So she wrote this book in 2015 called The Silencing. Now, she is to the left of me politically. Now, why does that matter? Because she writes in this book, although she kind of considers herself politically liberal, she writes a book criticizing what she calls the illiberal left. She said the left used to be in favor of human rights and free speech. Now it's about silencing anybody who has a different viewpoint. Now, if I wrote that, they'd say, Sean, you teach at Biola, you're conservative. Of course, that's your viewpoint. But she's more liberal, so she kind of has a little bit of the status, so to speak, to poke the side that she's more broadly on. So I bought this book, and it was a hardback. It cost me like $27. And it took me like 4 hours to read this thing. But I read books pretty fast.
And I got to the end, I'm thinking, okay, she's right. She's talking about this intolerance in the media, this intolerance in Hollywood, this intolerance in the educational system, and these efforts to silence people of different viewpoint. I'm getting to the end going, okay, what do we do about this? I'm really interested. Gets to the end, and she gives one paragraph response about what we should do. I read it, and I took the hardback, and I threw it across my desk. I was like, really? I spent 4 hours, $27, and that's all you got? I was kind of ticked. I'm like, I just invested in your book. And then I thought about it more. And then I thought about it more. And I realized she's right. So you don't have to buy the book. I'm going to give you the nugget of what she said. Listen, here's what she writes at the end. So she's talking about how there's this huge cultural movement to simply use power to silence people who see the world differently. And she writes and simply says, we should all make efforts to invite people who hold different views into our worlds. Contrary to popular thought, familiarity doesn't breed contempt. It breeds understanding and tolerance. Now go make some unlikely friends. That's what Jesus did. He didn't just hang out with people that agreed with him. He didn't hang out with the people he was supposed to. Jesus is like, I'm going to find the outcasts. I'm going to find those who are looked down on. And I'm going to reach out and I'm going to dine with them and I'm going to love them and I'm going to care for them because I want them to see God's goodness and love incarnated in relationship. So maybe their hearts would be open to the medicine that God has to offer that leads to a changed life. That's what Jesus did. That's what we're called to today. It's not possible like it might have been in the past to kind of live in just our small Christian community, Christian friends, Christian church. We can't. The world is global. I have a YouTube channel each week, and people send in questions, and I'll give like a 2 or 3 minute response. And a couple summers ago, I met a youth pastor, and I thought the story was so moving that I asked him, I said, can I just interview you like 3 minutes for my channel? He goes, sure. He was a youth pastor in Ohio, and he shared a story with me how he was a youth pastor on campus and an LGBTQ, a gay and lesbian transgender club, asked him to be the club advisor. Now, let me stop right there. Don't raise your hand, but I wonder how many of you would say yes and consider doing that? One response is, I'm not going to support that. I don't think that's right. That's one response. I said, well, what'd you do? He said, yes. I said, why'd you say yes? He goes, these kids wanted to hang out with me. Why wouldn't I do it? I said, okay, fair enough. I said, so you're coming into school once a week, meeting with these students. What were the conversations like? He said, in this club, the conversations where these students really felt marginalized. They felt like nobody understood them and nobody loved them. And I said, well, what about Christians? He said, Christians, he felt nobody loved him. He said, but then eventually they asked me, they're like, why don't you hate us? He said, I don't hate you because I'm a Christian. I think you're made in the image of God. He said, so wait, you can be a Christian and you can love us? He goes, what else does the Bible say about this topic of homosexuality? They're asking him this in a public school. He's like, so we bring out our Bibles and we looked at Romans 1 and those passages, but I kind of moved away from those passages to just look at this person of Jesus. I wanted them first to see, look at his compassion, look at his goodness, look at his kindness, look at his life. There's something transcendent about who he is. I said, well, what happened? He said, eventually, 4 of them came to my youth group, and 3 of them were saved. I said, what did this do to you? He said, honestly, I don't think I realized how homophobic I actually was. I wasn't gracious towards this community. I really held a grudge and an anger, and this broke my heart that these are human beings who want to be loved like everybody else does. You see what Jesus was doing? Jesus is like, get out of your comfort zone. Some people might criticize you. Go make some unlikely friends and dine with them. By the way, you can dine with somebody and it doesn't mean you accept everything that person believes or does. If that were true, you couldn't dine with anybody, right? I mean, pretty obviously, couldn't dine with anyone. I was speaking at church in the South, and I was driving with this pastor to church, and we drove by a Unitarian church, which basically you can believe anything, that anybody goes to heaven. The only belief you shouldn't have is that you are uniquely right and everybody else is wrong. That's basically, you shouldn't believe that if you're Unitarian, but whatever you believe about God is fine. So we're driving by this, maybe 5 or 6 minutes away from the church. And I'm with a pastor. We drove by. I said, hey, have you ever gone by there and talked with the Reverend? He goes, no, why would I do that? I said, well, you're a pastor. He's a Reverend. Maybe go out to coffee, talk with him. I mean, if anybody's going to share with him, shouldn't it be you? Right? Are you with me on this? We get busy and we get in our lanes and we get afraid to step out and love people. Friends, this is what Jesus did. This is what Jesus did. I'm telling you right now, it's coming here more than it is in California, but it's only a matter of time. Right now, this fall, in all public schools in California, there is gender training from kindergarten all the way through high school. And you cannot opt your kids out of it, or that's considered discriminatory if you go to a public school. You can out of sexual health training related to AIDS and condoms, but you cannot about gender training. That's considered discriminatory. Friends, the waves are moving. That those who say, I think the Bible's true, and I believe what God says about relationships and marriage and sex is good, considered bigoted and intolerant, what David Kinnaman showed in his study a decade ago. The question is, how are we going to respond? One response is to shout and have an us versus them narrative. The other response is to say, you know what? I love these people. I'm going to step out of my comfort zone. And I'm going to build relationships with anybody, regardless of politically where they're at or morally where they're at. Go out and love people. That's what Jesus did. And you know, in our culture where people are so distracted with smartphones, they're distracted. Rarely do people just sit down and connect face to face. I think this is a generation hungry for incarnational ministry. Question is, will that be you? Will that be you? So let me just wrap up by asking a few questions to bring this together for you. Here's some questions. You ready? Do people want to be with you? Do they? Do people want to be with you? Because Jesus was a Christian, and he never compromised truth. But people wanted to be with him. You know if you're loving if people want to be with you. Second, how do you show love to your enemies? How do you show love to your enemies? Because one thing our world doesn't understand is the forgiveness that Jesus has to offer. Any of you see the video trending this week? Some of you know what I'm talking about. A young man, he was an African-American man, and a white woman walked into his apartment thinking it was her brother's apartment, and shot dead his brother. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. If you haven't seen it, go home and watch it. I watched it on the plane yesterday, and I was like crying, and people are looking at me. I'm like, it's a moving video. And on trial, it's a 3 to 4 minute video. He looks at her and he goes, I wish the best for you. I love you. I wish you wouldn't have to go to prison. All I hope is that you would come to know Jesus Christ. And ask the judge if he can give her a hug. And walks over and gives her a hug and says, I love you and forgive you, the person who shot and killed his brother. That's the gospel. Our world doesn't understand that forgiveness. What happens in our world? Somebody says something wrong and it's a Twitter attack, get them fired, angry. when Christians respond with graciousness and with kindness, and reach across the political or religious lines and say, you know what, I just want to dine with you. I want to know you. I just want to show you the love of God incarnated. That's the power of grace. So how do you show love to your enemies? And how are you countering the narrative that Christians and the church are bigoted? Not just my job. It's not just the director of Steer's job. It's all of us, by loving people. And finally, what is one risk you can take to show God's love and grace to people in your life? Maybe ask God right now to give you an idea. What's one thing you could do practically to reach out to someone unexpected like Jesus did and show them God's love and grace? In our angry, divided, distracted culture, that's what's going to make a difference in the lives of people. Amen. You know, one of my favorite things to do when I go to conferences, I did this last night in Tampa, is I put on glasses and I become an atheist, like I role-play an atheist. And I put this on, I start taking questions from the audience, and I respond as an atheist might. And what happens is about 15, 20 minutes into it, people get really defensive. And they get angry, and they get argumentative, and sometimes even hostile. I'm not making this up. You can watch it online. And they know I'm a Christian. Then I take the glasses off, and I debrief it with people. The first question I always ask is this. I say, how did you just treat the atheist? And you know what happens? It's this moment where people go, oh, shoot. I wish you could, I see it on their faces. It's like, you just got me. You see, the Bible calls us to make arguments, but not to be argumentative. You see the difference? Jesus reasoned with people, but he wasn't argumentative. He loved people. But one thing I've realized, I've asked myself is, why do groups, when I do this to Christian audiences, including pastors, get so defensive? You know what I think it is? Because we don't know what we believe and why we believe it. We don't know. So when somebody presses us, what happens? We get defensive. We get defensive, we get afraid, so we lash out. So to me, what I found with students is when students know what they believe and why they believe it, we're not afraid that someone's going to ask us a tough question. And we're able to reach out and love and have fruitful spiritual conversations. My father was a skeptic trying to disprove Christianity, and he was surprised, number one, by the evidence, but number two, by the love of God. And he set out to disprove the faith, but was amazed at the positive evidence, drawn to the faith, and ended up becoming a believer. And he wrote this book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict in 1972. When he wrote it, no publisher wanted it. They're like, that won't sell. Now every publisher wishes they had taken it. Over 4 million copies, I don't know how many languages worldwide. And the last one was in 1999, but we recently updated it. It's on how do we know the resurrection is true? The Bible's true. And Jesus is actually God in human flesh. Had a chance to work with 12 scholars and 13 scholars and 3 dozen graduate students to update this book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, to be the kinds of answers to be ready when people ask. That's back there if it's helpful. Then there's a book called A New Kind of Apologist I put together, which is basically like 2 things. How do we address these tough, thorny issues? Like, how do we talk about race? How do we talk about the transgender issue? How do we talk about same-sex marriage? And then second, what are practical strategies to have spiritual conversations like Jesus did? Those are helpful. They're back there. But the bottom line is, what do we learn from Jesus? He took a risk. He stepped out of his comfort zone, and he reached out and loved people because he knew when they saw that love incarnated in his life and they got his medicine, then they could become the kind of person that God wants them to be. Jesus was not a moralist, but he loved people and gave them grace. That's what our world is hungry for today. Amen. Father, I thank you for this ministry. I'm humbled to be here and have a chance to just speak and open up your word and just see how so many people are sacrificing their time and their resources to give back to ministries that are making a difference. God, as we look at this passage in Mark, I pray you just break each one of our hearts. Help us not to be the moral police, but those who just step out and love people. God, bring to our hearts and our minds maybe people that we can think of specifically, that we can go out and love better, just like you did. Put your hands of protection on this ministry, God. Meet their financial needs, and I pray you'll help them to continue making the difference for the kingdom that they are making. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to sneak the back. Would love to say hi, sign a book if that's helpful. But God bless you for being here and your ministry through Steer. Thank you.